Cool. So let's start with that. This time, instead of, as I just explained, normally we have a third guy, or in some cases, four people. This podcast we decided to do alone. And yeah, Alfie, I would like to ask you about the start of your personal journey. Like, how did you start, and what did you use when you were really starting out music production at the very beginning? I'm not talking about when you first bought, not like after a year, but actually when you ever. When was the time when you first touched the door, and what was your equipment back then? Because in my case, it was. I will talk about it after that, but let's hear.
In my case, I start about 16 years ago with Dance EJ. That was
What dance, EJ?
Dance EJ. Yeah, that was not a DAW, something like DAW that you just
PlayStation or what?
use samples and put the samples next to each other and start from there
Something
actually.
like super basic stuff, basically, like a PlayStation. Where there were games on PlayStation, like music production games, for example,
Yeah.
um, which were also sample based. The funny thing there is one really famous rapper in Germany, for example. He's called Sido, and they had a label and were when they were young artists, not as famous. Now they are really famous, but back then they were not famous. And the first beats that they wrote, for example, was actually on PlayStation, and they become world class musicians basically. So that's quite interesting. So how was it called? EJ.
Dance EJ.
It sounds fucking horrible, to be honest.
EJ. Yeah, that
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
was.
yeah.
And that was the
Okay,
beginning. I don't have anything. I used my uh, stereo speakers as
some hi-fi stuff. Yeah,
yeah, no monitoring, no acoustic. I didn't
yeah.
know about the acoustic actually that time. But yeah, for the first,
Of course not.
I just start using my laptop, not laptop actually. There then, just my PC, and yeah, that was it. I just
Yeah, yeah. Okay, that was the software side, but then okay, hardware-wise, you used, of course, a mouse and a keyboard, and you used some kind of weird-ass old PC screen and a PC, and you didn't have monitors, so you used hi-fi speakers,
exactly.
and you used yeah. So basically, when you look back now, 16 years back, like if you look back, that's a nightmare.
Yeah, exactly. That's a joke more
So,
than
so, but everybody starts out at some point,
yeah,
and
exactly. That's the point.
that's that. And when I started, it was similar. I had a hi-fi system from my father, which I used like a Sony, really commercial hi-fi system, and that was what I used in the beginning because I didn't even own a PC when I was 20. So I just got my first PC, like I think 21 or something like that. I was 21 maybe. My first laptop from Asus, and um, yeah, I think I told the story already. I was studying art, and I was in a project called International Munich Art Lab, and that was my luck that I was in this artistic project. And so I had a chance to actually know the professional way from the beginning, kind of. But I myself didn't own the stuff. So you need to imagine me being in the preparation for university, like a really hardcore art university. And I made it already. I made it before time. So, like this 1 year preparation project. But I made it after like 8 months or something like that. The professor told me already, you're taken. So then I had free time, and I was getting, luckily, from one of my professors. He was himself a music producer and a visual artist. Fantastic guy. He was teaching me really, really a lot. It was one of my mentors, actually, like 40-year-old electronic music producer and art professor. And he managed to get me a sound card, monitors to work with, obviously not to take home, no, like all to work with in the place, in the project. So I had a chance at least to have access to that kind of equipment and to work every day. But you need to imagine, I didn't own a PC back then. So it was
Yeah.
very limited, basically, because it's a super complex thing, and you need to spend a really long time with it, obviously, to understand the first hurdles, or like the first steps of audio creation. Basically, you need to understand it, you need to spend a lot of time with that. But I had my first results, and my first results were really not even recognizable as music, I would say, today, because I really had no knowledge about it at all. I had no way to start, other than like a short introduction from this guy who was arranging all the stuff for me. But yeah, then I got my first PC just at the time when I was coming to university in 2008, and then I really started to work hardcore, but on what? So I was working on this Sony hi-fi system at first for, I think, maybe 8 months or something, 10 months or something like that. And then obviously my music sounded horrible. It was the biggest problem of not using monitor speakers is obviously that you can be lucky, but you can't really evolve properly, because it's just based on luck in this case. You know what I mean? It's like maybe it sounds good or maybe it doesn't, but hard to do with the hi-fi system. Then I ended up buying the KRK. So okay, let's go a little bit further here. What was the first monitor speakers you bought, Alfie?
I remember actually, because I live in Iran, and back then there wasn't any good teaching stuffs for DAWs and nothing
Yeah.
at all. Remember I found somewhere a Cubase learning pack with cracked version of Cubase. At the
So
first,
somebody gave you that, I guess. Somebody gave you like a
I
hint or something.
yeah, I bought it from a store because
You bought it from a store.
yeah, in
That's
Iran it's
amazing.
like that.
Yes, because okay, so like for the explanation for the people, because it sounds like for like a person from Germany, for example, it probably like what? He bought a package with like pirated software. And yes, in Iran, I can very well imagine that, because in many other countries it's the same. So like in Mexico or in Morocco, for example, there's one place called Gemma Efna, I think. No, that's in Marrakesh. There is a market in Casablanca, for example. On this market, it's an electronics market. You will find literally anything in the world, like some weird ass Korean chip or something like that. You're gonna find it, and you're also going to be able to buy pirated software, pirated games, pirated whatever, pirated anything, basically anything pirated. And it's just a huge ass market. Like I'm talking big, like huge, and those stores are there forever. It's like not that it gets, that the police is after it or something like that. They don't care.
Exactly,
In this
because
case.
in this case
Yes.
we couldn't even buy something because our bank is
Yeah.
disconnected from the outside the world,
Yeah.
outside of Iran. So it's just
Yes.
inside,
Uh,
and inside we can just buy the
yeah.
cracked version.
And then
And
yes,
then
and
I
that
start
brings us.
to
Yes.
buy a 3-inch Yamaha. Uh, that was the very start of my
three
journey.
inch Yamaha.
Yeah, very.
3-inch Yamaha.
I still have it,
Like I, okay,
and
you still have it. That's
I
cute. How are they called? HS3?
HS3, yes, exactly.
I didn't even know they exist. But the HS5, so for clarification for people that are interested, the there are a couple of companies which share the field today, but one of the oldest companies who was in the entry segment of monitor speakers and quite successfully so is Yamaha with their HS series, and they're still in some genres very prevalent speakers. Actually, they're very cheap, and they have their own kind of character to them, of course. But there's some people who really appreciate them. And actually, I think there's a old speaker from Yamaha. Is it called NS8 or something like that? I don't remember. Like super iconic speaker, and it was originally sold quite cheap. It's I think a passive studio monitor. Not sure, but the point is that there are some 50-year-old Yamaha studio monitors which actually were never designed to be something high-end or something extraordinary, or like a wide field or a midfield or something like that, which will cost you 10,000 plus euros. They were originally designed to be actually quite affordable monitor speakers, and they end up to be in the best studios until this day as references. So not obviously as the main fucking thing, but it's great to have even, for example, some hi-fi speaker, some monitor speakers like the Yamaha, they have sort of a hi-fi character to them, I find. Even you could say that about the Dyne
Exactly.
Audio in a way. Yeah. But I think the Yamaha especially. So for some styles of music, it's actually, you will still find some old Yamaha speaker. Unfortunately, I'm not so versed that I remember the name. But you will still find old Yamaha speakers as reference, as second references in studios. And I know a lot of music producers which, just keep their old speakers, which totally makes sense. I mean, if you're working a decade with some speakers, doesn't matter how shitty they are, you're going to know them in and out. And that's the biggest advantage. Like that you have as a music producer is to know your room, to know your speakers very, very well. So for example, when I'm going to buy my next speakers, I'm very unlikely that I will sell my Dyne Audio speakers. Not going to do it probably, because it's first of all a personal connection that you have to this kind of gear, because it's like if you're working with it for such a long time, it's almost becoming a part of yourself in a way.
Yeah, and you know
Um,
it better. You know how it's exactly sound in this
yeah,
case, and it's
yeah, and that's
really
so
cool.
important.
Yeah,
That's extremely important. Is to have this confidence in your sound, even if it's not perfect, because it's not perfect, of course. Like,
yeah,
no matter who will tell you that he has the best, blah blah blah. It's most of the times it's like it's not backed up with empiric data. It's just
yeah,
a personal feeling. I also have a feeling that my studio is nice. Probably you also have a feeling that your studio is nice. But the only thing which really talks truth would be data, right? So, and making music and sound in general and this stuff is very subjective after all. Um, but yeah, okay. So I think for the people who want to start by themselves, maybe they are listening. Maybe some people are listening or will listen in the future to this podcast and think about like, okay, what do they really need? Maybe let's go through that quickly. So uh, I think we're on the same page, so it doesn't matter if you say it or I say it in this
yeah.
case. But what are the very crucial things you think that are necessary for a beginner? Let's listen and compare. I think that we are probably saying the same thing here, but let's see. Let's see. What do you think are the most crucial things to buy for a beginner producer equipment wise, and what is the terminology? So for example, what is the first thing and what is the second thing, etc., because that also is like important, right? Like, do you
Yeah.
buy headphones or do you first buy speakers? And we're talking about a normal human being, not somebody who has rich parents and gets everything fucking, like paid
Yeah.
by his parents. I'm talking about a normal human being. So let's say you're a 20-year-old guy, 25-year-old guy. You have some budget because you do your first work or whatever, but your budget will be limited. So what are the first things that you tell your student to get?
I really. prefer speaker monitoring the first because that's how you really need to hear the real sound, and in the same time
Yeah.
the acoustics is important because you cannot have a good quality good hearing with a bad acoustic
Sure.
environment.
But you need to think realistically, Alfie. Like I agree with you, of course, but you need to think out of a mind who is in a world of unknowns. So like when you're starting music production, since you are not fucking, you know, God who knows everything, but just when he like enters this world, you're
Yeah,
basically in a chaos of knowledge and a chaos of things to do or not to do, and people say that, and people say this, and people say that. And my experience, sorry to interrupt you, by the way, I
no,
didn't
bro.
mean to, but my experience in this case is that it takes quite a bit of time until a person goes from I'm buying speakers because that's important for me to make music to I'm going to acoustically optimize my room and going to start to make it sound better because that's so important. And even if you tell it to him, like acoustics are quite important, but he is at zero. So he doesn't even know how anything works. And therefore, this is
Exactly.
like kind of like it's like some shining hill on the mountain is the world of people who understand acoustics and shit. But you are like far away, you know, like on the beginning of the mountain, and you can just look up. So I agree with you. Speakers are one of the first, but I wouldn't say it in the same terminology. Let's listen more.
Yeah,
After
but
you have the speakers,
speakers and acoustic in my opinion the same time. And the next thing really important is sound card, bro, because the quality that your sound card gives signals to your sound to your speakers is really important. I changed five, four or five sound cards, and really feel the difference between a good sound card and a bad sound card. At the beginning, it's not
it's
important
interesting.
because you cannot
Yeah,
distinguish the very good between the
yeah,
great sound and the good sound, and they're all good
yes.
in
It's
your
very
case.
theoretical. It's yeah. So what people need to very much understand about sound cards, because there is a trap inside this whole thematic or thematical cluster of DACs, digital to analog conversion. This is what actually is a sound card for what it's doing. It's taking a signal which is only zeros and ones and transferring it into electricity. And for there's a couple of very important things to understand about that. And one thing is the quality of the transformation, basically. So, like, how accurate is it taking the zeros and ones and transferring it into how accurate will the signal will be actually that you're listening to? Those changes are minute and etherical, and they are there. If you're an experienced musician and you're working a lot in a studio, you are going to come. You know, let's say you buy a really good sound card and you're coming from a really shitty sound card. That's the best way of experiencing the difference for yourself. Because if you're moving in a high level of sound cards, it's really etherical differences. And actually, in some cases, it's I will go back more into the technicalities, but there are sound cards, for example, for 2,000 euros, which have effectively the same component inside that the sound card for 1,000 euros. And then everything what you say about better duck conversion is absolutely just happening in your brain. It's not reality. You know, that's not reality. It's there is a certain duck inside. If it's the same duck, it's going to do the same thing. But what I really want to hammer out here is that there is a misconception of some people that they think that they will improve their work. And I couldn't subscribe to that. Like, you will not become a better music producer by having a better sound card, in my opinion. It's not
Exactly.
having any effect on, it doesn't have any effect on the performance of you as a musician, but makes your life a little bit easier by being more accurate. you can test that also out, I believe, as far as my knowledge and understanding of conversion, etc., is correct. Then a way to try that out would be, well, get a good sound card and get a bad sound card and listen to the difference very, very closely, actually.
Yeah.
But yeah, okay, sound card.
Really, the most important thing, in my opinion, is your knowledge, your intuition, and your creativity in this case. Imagine you have the best sound card with the best speaker monitoring, but you cannot use them. You don't know how you make a music.
Yeah, I saw many examples of that in my life, actually,
Yeah.
of people having really good shit and not knowing what to do with that. I
You
think
don't
that's so common. I mean,
Yeah, you didn't. They didn't even know what is the good sound.